All right. Thank you for joining us, everybody. Today is February 18th, 2025. We are here for the purposes of not only a Salt Lake City School District Board of Education meeting, but also a study session under the new format that was adopted by the board in the previous month. So we are here to discuss magnet programs. We have Dr. Hall with us, the superintendent, the board, and Charlotte Fife Jefferson will be joining us here in just a few minutes. So Tiffany, I guess the time is yours unless the superintendent needs to set the stage for anything.
Nope, that's great.
Okay.
Run with it, Tiffany, and then it'll start the conversation.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad to be here. I don't know if this feels more like a study session or a responding session, but I have had a list of questions that kind of framed where this discussion went. So I'm just going to be very upfront that there is a presentation of data first that I was asked for, and then after that, hopefully, then the discussion will be able to grow from there. I also just want to make sure that everybody knows that Dr. Alex Parsons is out. She did have a healthy and beautiful little girl, and so we're very happy for her and that she's able to be with her family at this time. So if you ask me any really hard questions, the answer might be, please check with me in 6 to 8 weeks. So off we go. We are going to be talking a little bit about class sizes, about some enrollment trends, about enrollment and identification and how those things go together, and then what our middle level programs look like, because they are really, well, they're very interesting. So we're just going to get there. But I'm going to begin with one of the first requests, which is, where are there special programs? Now, this is not the comprehensive list of special programs, but it is the comprehensive list of our gifted and talented programs, our magnet program, which are our standalone programs that offer services for students in grades 1 through 6. And of course, we know that those are at Edison, Indian Hills, and Whittier. We also have 5 and 6 at Washington that is phasing out. So this is the last year of its 5th grade. Next year will be the last year of its 6th grade. And a DLI ELP program, and that's just always the way that we've referred to it. It is a magnet DLI program, and that is now currently at Nibley Park, where a neighborhood DLI program is coming up right behind it, so that we will have a neighborhood DLI program filling that school eventually as that comes in. So we have kindergarten and 1st grade there now. So those are marked, and then our DLI programs at Mountain View, Newman, and Nibley Park are marked. And then you'll see that every elementary school has the academic advancement and mentoring program. And those are really targeted at students in 4, 5, and 6. But we also do reach out work for students in grades 1, 2, and 3, and sometimes even kindergarten, to really help identify or move students towards being a part of that AMP program. And as we've reported previously, that program has really flexed. I think our old model was identifying a group of about 15 to 40 students per grade level, sort of really depending on the size of the classroom at the school. And that group of kids would have pull-out services for the entire year. In our new model, we are looking at students that have high quantitative scores and then doing a session of 4 to 6 weeks around quantitative issues, non-quant scores or our nonverbal scores or our verbal scores, so that we have a larger number of students that are able to be identified in the AMP program and have their academic identity built around that idea of being part of a special program because they're really good in an area. So we're going to continue to expand that identification and invitation process at every one of those middle or elementary schools with this program. Board Member Jensen.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Hall. I just think it would be helpful for the public if you explained AAMP and DLI.
Okay.
I mean, we know those acronyms, but
Sure.
I don't know if some of them do if they're listening in.
Okay, again, the AMP is Advanced Academics and Mentoring Program. And again, that is really for students primarily in grades 4, 5, and 6 in our elementary schools. We don't continue AMP into middle school. In middle school, we move into either an honors or a magnet, and I'll talk some more about what that looks like toward the end of this program. And then our DLI program, and thank you, I just kind of, they roll off my tongue, you know, is our dual language immersion program. And in that program, students are in a class or they're in a half day of English and half day in a target language. And in our district, the three programs with the DLI program are all in Spanish. So we have students that are having half of their day in English and half of their day in Spanish in the dual language program.
Thank you.
Thank you. I had several questions about magnet class sizes. And so I just wanted to have this information up again. We looked at it the last time that we met. And it looks at all of our programs, including the ones that are in the phase-out process. And the numbers that are in blue are the smallest in that grade level. So for instance, in our grade 1, you'll see that, Edison, we have 16, in Indian Hills, we have 18. And then in Nibley Park and Whittier, we have 15. The last time we talked about magnet, about our combined grade 4 and 5 class at Edison. We have in the past split some of the early younger classes. I have to go through all my notes to make sure I've answered all the questions. We have mixed some kinder classes with neighborhood kinder classes where that has been a small class. And then we have also I also want to just point out in our dual language program, in that magnet DLI program, we only enroll students in the first 2 years because the language development is so intense that if they're not a native or heritage speaker of the target language, it is not possible for them to catch up after those first 1 or 2 years have gone by because they have acquired so much Spanish and there is no English at all in the Spanish side of the class. And so if they're not conversant in the Spanish, then they're not able to maintain.
I have to say into this. When we're looking at the magnet DLI, it's phasing out, and you're
Correct.
watching the numbers drop down. We had that Washington pilot, and we talked about at what threshold would you recommend something different. So like 17 right now is actually much healthier than the previous year's numbers were when the board voted to discontinue the program. But I have the same question that I had then, which is, as these numbers go down to 10, at what point would we recommend that we no longer hold a full classroom per grade level?
So, and that's a great question. One of the things that we did when schools were closed in the last year is that we, did promise families, and this will come up in the conversation about where students are at in each of our area models, but we had talked about preserving that program so that it would phase itself out. We would be able to if we needed to. So our neighborhood program at Nibley Park is now in kindergarten and first grade. And so we would not have, for instance, a third grade that we would be able to move to. So we have some shared teachers, or we have some teachers that are teaching 2 grade levels, so maybe a 4th and 5th grade English and a 4th and 5th grade Spanish, different models like that. But, unless we were able to have students transfer in that had been previously in a DLI program or who were native speakers, we wouldn't be able to do a lot with that particular grade level. So that is a concern. And I guess as the board, you would need to make a decision and tell me what that needed to look like. But that particular grade just ended up smaller across the board. One of the things that has been an issue with the Emerson DLI program and now the Nibley DLI program is the number of students that phased out, especially in grades 5 and 6 and went someplace else. And that really breaks up the continuity because just to talk about the whole program, thank you, Board Member Jensen, for reminding me, that I talk a lot about just the elementary DLI, but really the whole point of the DLI program is that it is a 12-year program of continuous Spanish instruction. And so students will have their half a day in grades 1 through 6 in Spanish, and then in middle school and high school, they continue the program with classes that not only continue to work on Spanish, but also build understanding and knowledge around culture and arts and literature and all of those pieces so that they become a well-rounded student, moving into high school, taking their freshman year DLI class at the end of that, taking the AP test. And as I know many of us have had children that take the AP test and with a significant score or a high enough score, many universities will award them college or university credit for that. Once they pass the AP test, they go into what we call a bridge program, and that is a joint class that's taught between our teacher and a teacher from the University of Utah, and those students earn 3 units a year of credit. So a student could graduate from high school having begun in kindergarten or first grade with anywhere from 3 to 12 units of university credit, which all of our state universities have signed on and agreed to count as full credit, meaning that at most universities, students only need 1 or maybe 2 additional classes to finish, which would be one of their electives, to finish in any degree that they wanted with a minor in Spanish, and that ability to move into any career field with a bilingual focus. And so in my mind, it's very important to continue to say, this is the first step of a process of building a graduate. And our graduates that are able to speak in another language and to do things with that language as a result of the continuous 12-year program that we've provided. Also on this slide, before I go to the next one, just again, we've talked about Edison and this particular small class in our 6th grade, 5-6 split for next year, but also drawing your attention to that average district class size. That is going to come up in a later slide when we talk about how we are going to look at what a full class means as we think about that. Just for comparison, because that's a great question about that magnet DLI class with 10, these are some of the numbers in our DLI program. And so you can see that those are a different, we have a much higher enrollment, especially in those younger classes. So at Mountain View and Nibley Park, we've got 22 and a half of 2 classes each. So that's 46 or 45 kindergarten students in both of those programs. At Newman, 22. So those neighborhood programs, we really do see a push towards making sure that we have DLI programs in our district. That's something that parents have really asked us for. And it's always very pleasant when you see parents asking for things and the numbers follow the students. Some of our smaller classes at Newman are also, because they've come from Mary Jackson, where we were really getting on the model, having a great time expanding that program, and we're really looking forward to seeing that program grow. Okay, we have some information about our invitations and enrollment. So I have this for last year, and I also attached at the very end of your PowerPoint a sheet that had a little bit more data, and I'm going to just kind of talk through each one of these. And so this was what happened for us. We test universally in this district at the end of the end of kindergarten and at the end of grade 3. So for our rising first and our rising fourth. Now, a long time ago, and not a long time ago, but several years ago, we used to start this testing before kindergarten and started ELP in kindergarten. We had some concerns with that. And we've brought these to the board before as we phased kindergarten out of this. The first is the COGAT as an assessment, or any assessment in general, is not very nuanced when it comes to students who are 4 years old. Second, when we are testing students that are not in our schools and we don't have control over, that becomes an issue because it is all opt-in. It is parents who know, even when we attempted to go out to schools and hold testing at various schools in the district, it's still very hard for us to feel like we had a comprehensive look at all of the students. So moving that testing into kindergarten for first grade allowed us to say, we're able to push this testing out more universally to all of our students. So we had, again, these. So in January, yes,
When my son was invited into what was then NELP, is now AMP, my understanding back then
Mind
was just
pulling your mic down just a little
Oh,
bit?
yeah, the mic.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
it's so casual, I forgot about this part. It's, to repeat myself, when my son was invited into AMP, which back then it was NELP, and it's been a while, I believe it was around fourth grade, and my understanding back then was that the AMP/NELP program wasn't offered until about that age. So when you're talking about the rising first grade testing, is that specifically for the magnet, which was
magnet program,
previously known
that's
as
correct.
ELP?
Yes.
But the rising fourth grade sounds like it could be for AMP and
yes,
the,
for
okay,
both. That's correct.
thank you.
Yep, that is absolutely correct. And that is because, the magnet, again, starting in first grade, and then, we do add students to both programs in rising fourth grade. We also, just for the record, also will retest in sixth grade if students are interested in going into a magnet program in seventh grade and they haven't been tested. But we do hold if you have tested into magnet once, that's the end. You're in magnet forever. We don't go back and, let's imagine that you aced it as a rising first grader and you had a bad testing day as a rising fourth grader. We don't care. Like, once you're in, you're in. That's just the way that we roll. It would be cruel and inhumane to do it any other way. So, coming in, you can see that we invited, again, last year, 52 students and had 43 accept those placements. And the piece that I want to kind of go through, and on your sheet that was at the very end of this presentation, it has a little bit more information that I just want to explain why there are all of these different groups. So we tested in the spring, and we had some students from spring of 2023 that were accepted but deferred their enrollment to start in first grade. That was generally students for Edison. That was our first school that we discontinued kindergarten in, because that, with the DLI program as well, was kind of complicated. So we did have a group of students that tested in 2023, and we had been doing that for a couple of years. And we said, if your first choice, and I'll get back into the choices in the next slide, but if your first choice is Emerson because you want to be DLI, we'll hold that deferment. You can either open enroll into Edison, stay at your home school, whatever you choose, and then we'll start you in that DLI program that next year. So that brought 14 of our students in. And then in January of 2024, testing those rising first graders, we had another 38. So we had 52 total that were invited and 43 that accepted. Then we did in March and so that January testing is our grade-wide testing, and our AMP teachers help us do that. We'll talk about identification later. I keep saying that, but just so that we can move through the information. We do opt-in testing, and that opt-in testing is for our families who are outside of the district. And so if they, see on our website, we have the testing up, we have a form they fill out, we contact them if they've reached out to us, and we provide that opportunity for them to test as well. So that happens in March. Then we have, it's not a testing window, but we have an invitation window. And so in spring of 2024 especially, we reach out to students who had been previously eligible or found eligible, but they had declined or deferred or did not respond. We reach out to re-invite them just to let them know, if you're still out there, interested in coming in, once magnet, always magnet. It's like being a Panther, right? Or, yeah, once a Panther, always a Panther. That's how we roll. And so, we reach out to them. And last year was particularly interesting because we had committed to our families that in any school or any program that they could travel with that cohort. And so, for instance, when Hawthorne was closed, a lot of the Hawthorne students are now enrolled up in Indian Hills. And that's because that is what we said that we would do, that we wouldn't break apart that cohort. And so in looking at that cohort and thinking about where they would be, we knew that that was going to perhaps give us that bump because they would be out of that area model. But rather than disband them and send them to all the places when they'd already been to school for a couple of years or several years with that group of students, we committed to them moving over together. Now, I did have some questions about what happens then if a student who perhaps is in the Whittier area model boundary now, but is at Indian Hills, maybe they have a sibling. Because splitting up families, we know how difficult that is. It's very hard. And sometimes families do that by choice. I have a friend who, no lie, drives her kids to 3 different schools because one wanted, this is in another district, she takes one to a French program, one to a Spanish program, and one to another district to be in a Chinese program. They have worked out quite a carpool. But that is their choice, and they do that. What we attempt to do is keep those families together. So just like our open enrollment process, where if families have a sibling at the school already, they would be, those same students are bumped kind of to the top of the list. They're given a priority point for having a sibling, and so we are mirroring that piece. And so does that mean that we may have some students in the next couple of years that continue through the process of being in one of our schools so that we can keep those families together? It does. Again, we committed to those families when we opened the program that we would support them in that way. Yeah.
For the public's purpose, and maybe this covered it and I forgot it, but for the families that say they might have those complex scenarios and they feel like their concerns and their needs aren't being heard as they're juggling all those nuances, who would they reach out to help that person better understand the complexity in their family situation to hopefully navigate that a little bit better for them?
So when they receive their invitation to apply for the program, there is a place on that form that says, do you have another student in the program, or where are they at? Or do you have any other circumstances that we need to be aware of? And so they can fill that in. If they have additional questions about that, they can reach out to the ELP office. We have, Dr. Parsons is out, but Maggie Nickerson, our secretary there, is extremely well-versed in all the processes. And then we have Karen Holman, who is our assessment expert. She's available and I'm available, so we're able to still reach out to that office if you have questions about what that looks like. Okay, continuing on down the road. Now, after we went through our closure process and looked at all of the different things that might have happened in that spring, we had quite a bit of stuff that we had to do to get that settled. And then we moved into some Edison-only identification, and that really was in all of the grades. We weren't able to start that until March. And so one of the questions was, what are we going to do to continue to bump that? Well, one of the things we are doing is starting now. Like, we would like to be able to focus in on that harder and earlier than we were able to last year. And one of the things that we do there, as we do with all of our students, is we use what we call the UTAG, which is the Universal Talented and Giftedness Survey. That's another way that we are able to work and identify students at Edison that may come with other skills in addition to a COGAT or another way. Again, I've got another slide on identification later. Then we have one last set of testing or round of testing, and that is our new to district. We do that in August. That is for families that move in over the summer. And so we'll test them at any grade level except third. We do them in January. And so we're able to look at that. So you can see in the Rising First, we had 3 new to district. They all were invited, or 3 new to district families or students that were invited, but then they decided to go elsewhere or they declined that placement. And we have that also in the rising fourth graders. So that was our enrollment trending for last year. We have just finished the January testing, so if you look down at all of those numbers, the two things that have happened as of this point is we have finished with 100% responses, the intent to return. So every year, every student in the magnet program is asked if they intend to return. That helps us with the initial number for planning. All of our rising first and fourth graders have completed this testing, and this week, their invitations, if they are eligible to be invited into the program, or if they are on the wait list and they are, then either of those scenarios, they will get an invitation that will lay out their next steps, whether that is, here is your form to fill out, or here are the things that will happen if there's movement on this wait list. So that will come out sometime this week.
Dr. Hall, real quick,
Yeah.
a couple of questions, I guess. On the U-Tag, is that like it's like an entry-level type of survey or test? And does that also, I know in the past, you and Dr. Parsons have talked about, how there's multiple disciplines or elements to ELP that include like art or civic leadership, and does the U-Tag help identify students for those particular tracks or disciplines?
I wouldn't say necessarily as a track, but it is a piece that would look at some different either things that they have in their lives that would identify that they have had circumstances that would help us identify them differently, or things like leadership or different pieces. If you're interested in looking at it, we do have it posted on the website. You can click through it as if you were a parent. Either a parent or a teacher can suggest that we use this, as well as our AMP teachers or administrators. We are constantly talking and working with the entire school faculty to make sure that they know if they have a student that would possibly, that they look at and they say, maybe they're still acquiring English, so some of their academic test scores are not as high as somebody else's, but we know that they, are able to do a variety of things. And so there are several different areas that looks for. When I get to identification, I'm also going to say that we use some of our end-of-the-year testing as well. You can use that not to exclude, but you can use it to include students. So, but yes, if you're interested in that U-Tags survey, it is posted online. It's not a secret survey. It's there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit
Brian has a
about.
question.
Oh, sorry.
Just one question. So back on that other slide, when you're talking about the opt-in and the new to district, I know that when you show like the number 4 and the number 3, those are the ones that went through the testing and now they get the invitation. I guess I'm just interested, do we have a lot of like out-of-district individual or families that are saying, oh, we're interested in your program? And are they filling out the forms to do that, or is it just a small group? I'm wondering what the interest is in these programs from families outside the district, or are there some that are moving to the district because they like these programs?
I think that there was, and I would have to go back up to pull that data. That is a great question, and it really looks at what I think has happened over time with gifted programs overall. I think we used to have more interest because we were one of the few districts that maintained kindergarten later than other districts did. And so we would maybe have some parents who would come in for kindergarten, but then they might cycle back out to their home districts for first or second or third grade. And the fact of the matter is, even for kids that are maybe really super readers or other things like that, the research is really not that great, not that conclusive, that being in a gifted program in kindergarten has a long-term beneficial effect. So I think that we might have seen more parents 10 years ago than we do now. So for instance, probably maybe 25 to 30 families may inquire, and then coming in to test, that number goes down. And then, as you'll see, even when they're invited, sometimes they make that decision, especially with younger kids, that maybe my neighborhood school. I mean, 90%, 95% of parents, they will choose their neighborhood school just because that's where their students' friends are, the people that they know. And so it really is often where they work. You know, there are other reasons that make that really compelling to take a different placement. Yeah.
One question on that last slide. I had a question about, do we know the ones who declined, where they go instead? Do we have that data?
For the ones out of the district, we don't know. We would assume that perhaps they stayed in their own district. You know, I don't think they were district swapping. But for the ones that decline in our district, very often they do stay at their neighborhood schools, and that's what they decide to do. Okay. All right. Let's kind of roll through this kind of quickly, because I know I have to end at 5 o'clock. Class enrollment, past practices. So this idea of a cap being sort of a new thing is really not a new thing. So let's just kind of remember how this went in the past. Previously, we had 3 magnet locations, Hawthorne, Whittier, and Emerson. And what we would do with those 3 locations is we would test all of the students, and they would all be in one bowl. And we would ask those students and their families, what is your first choice, second choice, third choice? And then we will try to match you. It was like going to medical school. We'll try to match you with your first choice or your second choice or your third choice, and we'll see what happens there. And inevitably, you know, we had the same number of classroom chairs that we have right now. So even if I took, let's just say, 25 first grade chairs, I would have 75 first grade chairs because I had 3 schools. But what would happen there is that I had a lot of steps that parents had to go through. They had to tell me what their first choice was, and then they had to wait to see whether they get their first choice or their second choice or their third choice. And sometimes if they couldn't get their first choice or their second choice, their third choice wasn't an option because of after-school care or transportation or where did grandma live. We heard all of these things. And so that model created, it added both some layers to the process, and it also pushed everything back. So our schools didn't know, transportation didn't know, we really didn't know. It had a lot of steps and they were all necessary, but we also had, that was a lot of work for parents because if they missed a date or they didn't return a document, then, you know, that was always a question too. So we had a start date for placement, and then after that initial date, we would place them as letters came in. Well, that also is a little bit, you know, if you're a very busy person, maybe you only check your personal email like I do every 3rd or 4th day, that is a disadvantage to parents who maybe are on their email all the time or it dings or whatever. They also had to really, you know, wait because after school and transportation, all of those things had to come after that placement. The other thing that would happen is that they would accept an invitation, but then later decide, you know what, this is going to be too hard, and grandma says she can't drive all the way over here to pick them up, and so we're going to remain at our home school. And so we had a lot of flux in enrollments, in placements, in transportations. Sometimes it was a week into the school year before some of those things were settled. That created some issues with buses, that creates issues for our teachers. So we really wanted to address some of those issues. One of the things that we talked about when we moved to the area model last year is that this means that families will know where their students are going even before they apply. They know that this is the school that they would be going to. So they can think about what that means for them in terms of transportation or after-school care, all of those pieces. And we also know that a limit is a necessary piece, and we've always had one. It's just that we were able to spread that out among the 3 schools because if we got to the end and we had 5 kids, we're like, well, you know, these 5 kids, you get your second or third placement. And so that wasn't necessarily as equitable, but it did mean that we had the same number of seats. And so in going to this area model, what we learned last year is that it would be much easier for everyone involved if we just said, let's have a number that we draw the line, because otherwise there will be this constant, well, but this school has 28 and this school has 27. when we had the 3 models and we just parsed them out, we balanced that way. I mean, you would put 25 in each school, and then the next person to come in would go to 1, and the next person would go to 2, and the next person would go to 3, and the next, so that we could keep those schools relatively uniform. Didn't always end up that way by the end of the year, but that was the placement. And so now we're trying to do the same thing. It's just that instead of saying that we're going to, wait and continue to balance as kids come in, we're just going to say, this is how we're going to balance. And we did, when we talked about this earlier, look at using district enrollment. But as you saw on a previous slide, our district enrollment is actually below what we would call a break-even point for being fiscally responsible. And so that doesn't mean that 25 or 28 students, even in a gen ed class, would be the point where you would split off and make another class. But it is kind of that break, is it okay if I say it that way, Mr. Kearsley, kind of the break-even point? Like, it's more or less a point that we would say, this is about how many kids we would expect to have in that class. So we're going to say that, 27 students K-3 would be our upper, and 30 and 4-6 would be our upper. And that's what we're going to roll with.
Can I ask a question about that? The practices make sense to me, but we are also at a weird bridge between the old way of doing it and the new way of doing it. So if I'm a student who is not zoned, for instance, to Whittier, but I have always gone to Whittier, and, school closure was not part of my decision, but I have 5 younger siblings who also want to go to Whittier because that's where their older sibling goes. How are we addressing that for families who started in one place?
Right. As I said, we're going to echo the open enrollment process. We are going to commit to those families that if you have a student already enrolled in those schools and your student qualifies into a magnet program and you say, but I have a student already in 5th grade, that we will not split your family and that that student would be placed in Whittier even though it's not their area model. We recognize that this is going to take us a few years to work through, but we would rather do that than have families needing to drive to 2 different programs.
Do we have a guess of how long that window of time might be of impact?
We said that we would bus families for 3 years after closure.
Okay.
So after that, families could make another decision if they wanted to. We have been open about that 3-year thing, so it could be that families may want to make that choice. If they have a 5th grader who's only going to be in a program for 2 years and an incoming 1st grader, they may want to look at a split, right? Because there's transportation to their area model school, and they may be driving them to the other school. But they would have some opportunities to think through how they wanted to play that. Yeah.
On the area model concept, is there an ability, if there is space available, for people to basically open enroll into these area model magnet programs?
Sure. So let's say that I went to Whittier in 2nd grade and Whittier was full in 2nd grade. And so I was on a wait list. But I learned that there is an open spot at the Indian Hills 2nd grade. I could apply to be on that wait list, and then I would be slotted into that wait list depending on my score. So it's possible that I could end up in an Indian Hills 2nd grade class or an Edison 2nd grade class, depending on what that looked like. I would be then in that class, and I would be off the waiting list for my area school. We won't put people kind of in 2 places because then that's not fair to the other people behind them. Great question. Okay, let's talk. Let's see, what does this do? So we know that means that, I've done that slide already. Good. Identification practices. So our initial screener is the COGAT. It's nationally recognized identifier. There are limitations. The national percentage and our areas were mapped so that if we identify the top 3 to 6% of students, then that should be the right number for us for magnet assignment. And that should be about right, having looked at all of our numbers over the years. There were some questions. Let's see, I'm going to deal with that on the next slide. So students who were not in the top 3 to 6%, but again, there might be reasons for that. Could be second language, could be adverse childhood experiences that would make that COGAT less nuanced for them. then those students could also be evaluated using that holistic matrix, that UTAGs that we just talked about, and that we could use that inventory to capture those perceptions. We can also look at other academic data. All right, and really, the question is, well, what happens, I think, people have said, well, what happens if all of the programs become full? If all of the programs become full, perhaps I come back here and say, are we ready for a fourth magnet site? I don't know. I'm going to wait and see. Like, that would be something that we're always open to as we look at this. Okay. COGAT identification, more. So there were questions about how we are testing students using the COGAT. And one of the first ones was around that kindergarten test, Rising First, and why we are giving first just the screener. So kindergartners, as you all know, being on the school board, are about 5 years old. And the screener is about 30 to 40 minutes long. And that is the far outside of what we can do with a kindergartner in one setting. But what we do then with the kindergartners is we take that top chunk of scores, and this year we did do the Ravens, which is a nonverbal test, because that's about another 35 to 45 minute test administration. But next year, we've purchased the new licenses to give that group of students the full COGAT. So they'll be doing the same thing that our rising fourth graders do. So we'll be moving over to that. Yeah. Was that?
And how long of a test is that?
That is about another 60 to 90 minutes. But we won't do it for everybody. We'll just we'll do the screener across the board. And then students in that top percentage of the screener, those would be maybe the top 20 to 25%. The numbers vary. But they would receive the full COGAT at that point for that more nuanced look at their identification. So this year, we did about 90 or 100, somewhere in there. It's about 30 to 35 students per area that end up going for that second step in that process. We also had a question about accommodations and what those look like for the COGAT. As with all tests, we have a TAM, a test administration manual, and that TAM helps us to know what is allowed in terms of accommodations for different tests. So our COGATs are all given by our AMP teachers, and the AMP teachers work with our special education department. So if a student has an IEP or a 504, that we're able to do these COGAT accommodations that are acceptable when working with the COGAT. We work through them to make sure that they're able to know, which ones they're able to repeat directions with or add extra time. So we're able to do those things. And then, as a question was asked earlier, this is also when we look at an appeal request, anybody can initiate that to use that UTAG screener or to look at some additional end-of-level testing data. And we review those appeals with a rubric to ensure consistency. One of the things that we know is that, we all know that the student that we know the best is the most gifted student that we've ever met. And what we found was we wanted to be really aware of making sure that a teacher or a parent who was really able to lay down some solid, they like to play with Legos and they talk a lot about death kind of descriptions. I don't know, that comes up a lot, I don't know why. But that was not, very existential. We're all reading Camus in kindergarten, and but that didn't sway a process from a parent perhaps that is an engineer and writes 3 or 4 sentences and calls it good. I'm married to one of those. 3 sentences is pretty good. So we're trying to really standardize this process as much as possible so that we don't have those kind of changes or floats in a direction. And then we have our middle school programming. So once you're a magnet, always you're a magnet. We have 3 middle school programs, Clayton, Hillside, and West. Now, Clayton and Hillside are magnets within a school. So students In those programs, they can decide that they want to be in magnet classes in social studies and English and maybe in science, but if they don't want to be in magnet math, they don't have to be in magnet math. They could be in another math, or maybe they love math, but they hate ELA. They can mix and match, and they can do all of those things there. Our third magnet program is at West High School. And West High School, that's all there is. So students who go there know that they are moving into this program. The other difference about West High School is that it is the place where they can accelerate because they have more access to high school level classes there. So recently, and by recently I mean this year, some of our state administrative code has changed to allow students who earn high school credit in middle school to carry that credit forward with them into high school. So all of our magnet programs offer 7/8 condensed math in 7th grade and an option for students to take Secondary 1 extended in middle school. But at West, students who have already, I think we have a couple students right now who are in Secondary Math 3 while they're in middle school because they've taken classes through the state online education program, or they've accelerated and demonstrated, that that's an area for them that they are good at. So they are going to West because they are wanting to accelerate in that way. And that's a real difference when you think about a gifted and talented program. Gifted meaning I'm naturally able to do things, talented meaning I'm able to do things with practice and support, maybe better than everybody else. I could catch a ball well, that's my giftedness, but my talent really comes when my coach works with me over time. But an accelerated program really means, and I want to move forward fast. So I've provided this, and perhaps should have provided it with the middle school program presentation as well. But these are the key features of that program at West because it is different. We have 83 7th graders and 111 8th graders this year, and you can see where they come from. We have about 40 out of district. So back to Mr. Jensen's question, Board Member Jensen's question, we have more students that enter from out of district into this program than we do to our elementary program, by far. So that is, that is where our data is. In this program, they do, because again, our administrative code says that you can't skip middle school classes and replace them with high school classes. So we do have to make sure that we are teaching the middle school classes, so you can see those 7th and 8th grade classes there. But as I said, they can accelerate in math, and they can also take as electives a variety of different high school courses. So I just, over the weekend, pulled up 25 or 30 different class schedules at West to see what kids in the ELP program and the magnet program, sorry, old habits die hard, are taking. And it is everything from 8th graders in Chinese and Arabic and French and Spanish to business management, to office aid, to fine arts courses, some in theater, some in art, some in choir, a couple of kids intro to debate, several kids in the creative writing class. I mean, there's just, and as they're taking those classes, they are taking them with students in grades 9 through 12. And so they're able to do that, and that credit will hit their transcript when they move into high school as high school credit. And last, awareness. Just a couple of things about how we continue to promote and make sure that parents know about this. So first, again, we're one of the few districts in Utah and actually even nationally that make sure that we do full grade testing, so kinder and 3rd grade, to help identify potential. And the students who are identified through that way, we do then email those parents when they qualify either outright or for subsequent testing, so that we can begin that communication process with them about what those scores mean. We work constantly with our school administrators, and in fact, we email on a regular basis principals, assistant principals, and the secretaries with information, asking them to put that in their school newsletter. That information also goes out in all of our district communications. We put it on the website. We contact some of our charter friends like the Open Classroom directly to make sure that they know, because they are a charter school that is not technically part of our district, but we do support them for this. We make sure after testing, parents are given the information about the scores in the parent portal and any next steps they may want to take. And so that we're able to really help recognize and find those gifted students and give them this information. We also, every year, follow up with students who are identified previously. We saw that in one of the charts about making sure that if they were identified, then we follow up every year and say, we identified you, would you like to play ball this year? And they can say yes or no. At Edison this year, as I said, we're really using more time to recruit those families, to talk to those families. We're asking, and the teachers, the administrators and teachers in the Edison program are reaching out, and they're reaching out through our family contacts as well to make sure that all of our families understand what this means. Our schools also have both walk-in visits and open houses advertised, and our middle schools do that as well. They will have open houses, and they'll review these classes in their registration process to make sure that parents and students recognize that these classes are available. And of course, the one thing that we also did that has really helped increase recognition is move from the NELP and MELP model of naming, which was difficult for many people, especially those coming from outside of the district, to Magnet, which is a much more nationally accepted and known name. Okay. Thank you for your questions. I'm finished with mine. Please.
Okay, so I just want to ask quickly about capping, because you talked about that. So if we go back and look at the numbers for the class size 2024, 25, right now at Indian Hills, we have in 2 of those grades, 4th and 6th, they're above what the cap is. So I'm imagining that there's going to be an exception made there if those students
They'll just continue through.
Okay, but what we're also saying is that program is full then. So people that are looking to go to Indian Hills like these next couple of years in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, they're most likely going to be told it's full.
It would be 5th and 6th grade.
Okay,
Because
right.
that's
Oh, yeah,
this
because
year's.
4th is going
That's
to
this
have the
year's.
smaller
So, yeah,
moving
so
in.
they would
Right.
continue on. So so for instance, our rising 4th graders, we currently have 13 in that class.
Right, so we'd be okay there. But
Yes.
those other 2, okay. Then the next one, and this kind of goes to capping, but you were talking about the ELP program at West. So when my children were participating in that, I mean, it was highly competitive. I don't know if it still is, but, and the wait list was pretty long, okay? Is that still the case?
No, I've been informed by the high school that we aren't capping anymore, that they're able to take the students that apply to come. And
Oh,
so
well, that's
actually
nice to know, because,
Middle school, we don't have, the only thing is that they need to have qualified into Magnet, but we don't wait list in middle schools at all, any of them.
Oh, well, okay, that's great, because when my children were there, you got in, but then, like, some of them would get there and they would drop out because it wasn't what they had envisioned, or it was hard for a 7th grader to be in a high school setting. I mean, there were numerous factors. So then they would move out of the program, but then there were people that were out there waiting, going, oh my gosh, I didn't get in, and how do you accommodate that? But you don't need to worry about that now.
No, and that was really very difficult. And, you're very correct in saying that sometimes students would get to West and it wouldn't be the right thing. It's like students who get into UCLA and then come back and say, that was just way too big for me. And it's not, it's just what school fits the student. And that's really what I would say there. So the hard part with that is when they're rolling in the semester, even when they're bringing a grade from another school, it takes them some time to grab their feet and to get grades figured out and all of those pieces. So, yeah, it's been a minute. I don't remember us doing a wait list, to be honest. So it's been at least 5 or 6 years.
Okay, and then finally, along that line, so at the West one, the 7th grade, it's lower, it's like 83, and then the 8th grade, it's 111. Do you think that part of that is that there are children that are thinking, okay, I'm old enough now that I can go? What do you think that disparity is? I mean, it's almost like 30,
I think it's math.
oh, okay.
I think it's math. We have students that come because this is maybe the only one on the Wasatch Front or in Utah where an 8th grader can take secondary
Oh,
2
okay.
or
That
3.
makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, most middle schools now have an option for a secondary 1 in grade 8, but not past that. And it's just not practical for a middle school to do that. But at West, if you needed to accelerate like that, you can.
Thank
That's
you.
my guess. Yeah.
Kind of going with that question, so are middle schoolers there particularly eligible for the SOEP program?
Yes, they are, and that's a fantastic question. The State Online Education Program is one of the ways that most of them have accelerated up to needing secondary 2 or 3. And that's a program where they can take classes online. They are teacher-led, they are original credit, and they will count for credit when they move into high school.
And is that not available for students at other middle schools?
It is, yeah,
It is or not?
it is. Anybody in the state can.
And what does can you repeat that
Yeah, it's-
acronym?
Yeah, there are a lot of acronyms right here, so I'm going to give them all to you. So
Yep.
State Online Education Program, SOEP, that is the program. You get into it using a program called SEATS. I don't remember what that one stands for, but that's how you register. And then within the SOEP, there are 8 providers that students can choose to take classes from, and there's quite a large variety. And middle school students can begin to take high school classes using that program. And as of this year, that credit all counts towards high school.
And that's a statewide thing? Okay.
Yeah, so it really is math in person. Because a lot of students find when they get to that higher level math, being in the classroom does help because they can ask the questions, they can hear them, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I think we should just come back to the first question I asked, which is at what threshold would we consider changes to this format, numbers-wise? Because we hear often that this comes from a different budget, but all of our money for students comes from the same big bucket. So just because we scooped a cup out of the bucket doesn't mean it's different water. So do these district averages show the outliers, or do they exclude them? Like, is this, the district average for first grade is 18, including ELP or excluding magnet classes?
Excluding.
It excludes it. So it's saying that's lower overall.
Yes,
So,
it does include our special ed and self-contained classes. I did not pull those out.
oh, so some of those would be below
yeah.
10. And that brings down the average. I guess what I'm saying is if you look at these numbers, you think, oh, these are somewhat uniform. But if you're in a neighborhood classroom with 32 and your next door neighbor has 13 or 14, and also we're paying for that difference, it doesn't really seem fair that we're paying for such small class sizes for one small group. So we can talk about how, beneficial the classes are, or how we've benefited from them. But what do people think about that? Like, at what threshold would we consider why we operate this in the way that we do?
Maybe there won't be a finite answer to that right now. I would suggest that we revisit this next year, because that gives us basically 2 years from the point that we closed the elementaries, have the elementaries more stabilized, and then see what the numbers are vetting out to be, to then in turn, figure out what the answer to that question might be.
And one reason I would offer that now is productive to talk about it, one, we have the study session, but we may not do that. But two, we did vote as a board to close a program because the class sizes were too small. But now we're subsidizing a program that has class sizes that are smaller. So I think it's, we've been told over time, this takes a while to build up, it takes a while to build up. But is there a timing that we would annually talk about that and just the financial component of it? Because the academic component of it, we understand the practices have become more expansive, there are all these benefits to the things we're doing, but at the end of the day, we have classrooms of 14 or less next to classrooms of, 29 and above. And I think that's something worth talking about for the students in the bigger classes.
I think you may also want to look at perhaps doing what some other districts on the Wasatch Front are doing, and that's beginning magnet programming in 4, 5, 6.
Oh, so you're saying that one reason they're smaller is because of the lower uptake in younger grades?
It could be. I mean, I'm just, as you look at the data, Nibley Park Magnet is an anomaly there because
Yeah.
Magnet and DLI should never have been paired together. So we're working through that, and that's one of the state assurances, that they're not paired because it should be open access. But if you look at our Indian Hills and Whittier numbers and even our Washington numbers right now, the 4th, 5th, 6th grades are the larger classes.
What districts do magnet starting in fourth?
I will need to answer that in 4 to 8 weeks. I just know that
6
Dr.
to 8 weeks, you
6 to
said.
8 weeks, yeah. Dr. Parsons has talked to all of them. She meets with the directors regularly. And
That's
so
helpful.
I know she told me that, but I don't remember where, and I won't quote it because I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's for the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've run short on time, but we could probably take one more question.
Well, I just wanted, if we did what some other districts do and start in 4th grade, students who need this kind of programming would suffer, I guess, in a way. Their needs wouldn't be met. But you're saying that the class sizes would be better, possibly? I'm sorry.
I'm just throwing.
Oh.
This is a decision that the board will make. I was just commenting that I know
Okay.
that that's something that some places have done. They've started that.
Could I just mention that gifted and talented programs in ELP, the magnet, is very new to West Side communities and families. And so if we could put some extra focus in advertising those programs in culturally responsive ways, I think that would help a lot. And if we could advertise them, the Edison program, one of the real benefits to have students go to Edison is that they will get an international perspective there. Their students will not only get the gifted education, but they'll have classmates from all around the world. And that is extremely valuable. It just widens a student's worldview. And that should be championed more, I think, could be.
Thanks, everybody. That'll conclude our study session, and please filter additional questions or feedback about the format, knowing that this is a brand-new thing that we're trying out. Be super helpful. Thanks, everybody.
And eat fast.